Tomorrow, join us for continued coverage of the crisis in the Soviet Union. And back home, the challenges of preserving Yellowstone Park on Good Morning America tomorrow.
Joining us now live from his home in Tennessee, the man who until 10 days ago was the U.S. ambassador here in Moscow and who is now an ABC News analyst and consultant to ABC News, Ambassador Jack Matlock. And joining me here in Moscow, a man who until June of this year was deputy spokesman for President Mikhail Gorbachev and is now an analyst of Soviet affairs, and that is Sergei Grigoriev. Mr. Grigoriev, the truth now, are you surprised by how quickly this thing was turned around?
Well, I think that on Monday, on the first day of the coup, we all knew it will not last for a long time. We're surprised. My prediction was it's going to be all over by next Monday. It's all over even earlier, but it's because of the people here that showed magnificent things and magnificent courage, as well as Boris Yeltsin and his people, who really knew well how to organize and mobilize people.
Tell me something. Why do you think that the men who held power for only 3.5 days, as it turned out, did not mobilize the military, use the military, and arrest Yeltsin right away?
Well, first of all, I think that the plotters were trying to use the old kind of mentality. They thought that fear is enough, that the Germans' fear in the Soviet people is so strong that they can do everything. And the other reason, and it's the main reason, is that the reforms initiated by Mikhail Gorbachev left such a profound impact in the Soviet society that the Soviet people can no longer live the way they used to be living for decades. But now the Soviet people have the feeling of pride, and they knew how to defend themselves and defend their democracy.
Ambassador Matlock, as you listen now to Mikhail Gorbachev, and I think you'll agree, he looked like a very weary man when he arrived here in Moscow about 2 o'clock in the morning. As you listen to what he had to say, give me your analysis. What do you think will be changed about the Mikhail Gorbachev who comes back now from the Mikhail Gorbachev who was overthrown just 4 days ago?
Well, I think, first of all, he has the possibility, and it's more than a possibility, probably a necessity, to move towards some really radical reforms. I think that is his inclination, but even if it weren't, I think that this will be a demand of the Yeltsin forces, and one which they very rightly can enforce. Second, it seems to me that he now is in a position to distance himself from the conservative party apparat, and if he will do that, I think that his popularity will begin to climb, so that he has possibilities which he did not have before, because the people who turned against him were like a millstone around his neck now for several months.
It is quite clear, or at least it was clear to me this evening, and I spent almost the entire night over at the Russian Federation building talking to Boris Yeltsin's aides and associates, and they are all making it clear that they're looking for nothing less than a coalition government. You think they'll get it?
Well, I think they can get something very much like that. As a matter of fact, some of the most capable people who once were with Mr. Gorbachev had joined Mr. Yeltsin after Mr. Gorbachev made his turn to the right last fall. So I think it would be quite natural that these people, some of them, are now available for senior positions. However, I think there's some danger in thinking in terms of simply a coalition between the center and the Russian Republic. There are other republics in the Soviet Union, and I think they have to take account of that.
Mr. Grigoriev, let me pick up on a point that Ambassador Matlock made just a second ago, namely he referred to some of the other republics in the Soviet Union. Can we be convinced that this thing is now really over, or is it likely that some of the forces of repression will still be seen, for example, in the Baltic states?
Well, it all depends on what position Gorbachev takes now, because if he really goes for a radical reform, it should be accompanied by a really radical purge among the personnel in the with the leading cadres and leading party people throughout the country. And if he goes for that, and if he pays credit to Boris Yeltsin and his supporters for making this victory possible, then we can expect good results. If President Gorbachev will try to move slower and achieve compromise, it is quite possible that the reactionary forces might try to stage another coup or make another attempt to destabilize the situation, because they understand that if they lose now, they lose it all, and probably forever.
Gentlemen, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to take a look at how today's events may impact on the U.S.-Soviet relationship.
Tonight.
On ABC.
Tune in later tonight and see what happens.
I love show business.
It was very early this morning in Kennebunkport, Maine, at President Bush's vacation home when it became clear that events were about to make a complete turnabout here in the Soviet Union. Standing by now in Kennebunkport is ABC's White House correspondent, Britt Hume. Britt, how and what did the president learn?
Well, the first thing he learned was that the tanks outside the Russian Federation building there had turned away, and the long feared or much feared assault there on Boris Yeltsin's headquarters had not occurred. But the early information the president had indicated that there were other elements of the military that were still around and whose intentions were uncertain. So when the president first came out to speak, he indicated that there were hopeful developments, but he was not prepared to say that the coup had failed. Later, after a conversation by telephone with Gorbachev, whom he'd been trying for a couple of days to reach, it was fairly clear to him, and I think by then to everyone, that the coup had failed.
Britt, there must have been a sense of euphoria, not only because of how things turned out, but because President Bush from the very first made it clear that coups can fail.
That's right, and the administration had not seen in the early stages of this coup any of the signs of the kind of brutal efficiency that previous Soviet crackdowns had shown, and that gave them hope that this one might simply not have the stuff that it would need to take charge of the Soviet Union. And of course, there was this sense, and President Bush has said this over and over again for the past couple of days, that these forces of democracy and freedom that have been loosed in the Soviet Union are like genies not easily put back in the bottle. And that certainly seems to have been the case with what happened outside the Russian Federation building, which did indeed seem to make a difference. So the administration had been hoping that the coup would fail, and obviously there is some elation and more relief, I think, tonight that it did.
Britt Hume in Kennebunkport, Maine, thanks very much. Joining us now live from Russell, Kansas, back in the United States, is the Senate Minority Leader, Senator Bob Dole. Senator Dole, if you'll hold on just 1 minute, I also want to introduce our other guest who joins me here in Moscow, a familiar face to many Nightline watchers, television analyst, himself a television commentator, Vladimir Posner. Senator Dole, I'd like to go first of all to you, though, and ask you, does this turn everything back precisely to the way it was before the coup, or have there been some changes in terms of U.S.-Soviet policy now?
Well, I think it was not a great step forward, but at least they averted a great step backward. So we're sort of back where we were. Nothing has been solved. The Soviet Union is still the same. They have very difficult problems. And I think now we need to first focus more on principles and less on personalities.
Well, if, for example, President Gorbachev now comes back to the United States, as I rather think he will, and say, you see, I was warning you all along, if you guys didn't give me a whale of a lot of help, then the right-wing forces in this country were going to come after me. They did. Now is the point clear? And if that question were put to you, A, would you agree that the point is clear? And B, do you think we ought to do anything about it?
Well, I think he's now free from those right-wing forces. He's a free man in a sense. I think now he can move dramatically on economic reforms. He can discontinue $4 billion aid to Cuba, and he can really start toward a market economy. If those things are done, then I think you're going to find a willingness on the part of the American people to support Gorbachev, and don't forget the 800-pound gorilla, Boris Yeltsin. He's going to be a big player, too.
Yeah, what do you think the 800-pound gorilla is going to be doing? You think he's going to be a necessary part of this government, part of a coalition, as some of his aides suggested to me tonight?
I don't know, but I think we're going to see more in this administration, more openly and unequivocally siding with the forces of freedom and free enterprise, and that's Boris Yeltsin. That's the Baltic states. That may be others who want their freedom. I think Yeltsin himself is much like Lech Walesa was in the early days. He is larger than life, and he is probably making a decision now to either share power or to assume more power and it has certain risks for him when he does that.
Vladimir Posner, let me ask you to pick up on a suggestion that Senator Dole made. He made it as more than a suggestion. It was really a statement of fact. Namely, that Gorbachev doesn't have to worry about the right anymore, that he doesn't have to worry about the conservative factions in this country. Correct?
I would say basically yes. Basically correct, provided that finally Gorbachev decides that he has to support the left or the radicals or the progressives, call them what you will. I mean, he is to blame to a certain extent for what happened. These men were handpicked by Gorbachev. When Yanayev was nominated as vice president, the Soviet parliament voted against him on the first round. Gorbachev insisted that this man be vice president, which shows a lack of judgment insofar as character and people are concerned. I think he's going to have a tough time.
Senator Dole, the fact of the matter is that Gorbachev kept sort of veering to the left, veering to the right, and you think his veering days are over now? Is that what you were saying to me before?
No, I agree with Mr. Posner said. I think now he needs to embrace the reformers, embrace the Yeltsins and the others in Moscow and Leningrad and in other republics in the Soviet Union and go straight ahead. And if he does that, he's going to find a receptive audience in the United States. But again, I don't think anybody knows here just what role Boris Yeltsin will play. And I remember the last time he came to Washington in June of this year, he wasn't met by a big entourage at the airport. I met him there with an assistant secretary of state, and that was the greeting delegation. I think the next time he comes to the United States, I probably won't be able to get near him.
Vladimir, do you think that Boris Yeltsin can be made palatable to Mikhail Gorbachev? They personally do not care for each other a great deal.
Well, I think the chemistry is wrong, and you can't change that chemistry. But I think Gorbachev understands, and perhaps it's painful to him, that Yeltsin saved his skin. He has to acknowledge that, and it's hard to do, especially if you don't like someone. But I think he's intelligent enough to realize he has to work with Yeltsin as long as he can work. And I'm frankly not that sure that now Gorbachev is going to be around for that long. Simply, he really doesn't have the support of the people. He doesn't come out of this as a hero. And as I say, he's going to have to answer for having appointed these people and having put so much trust in them. So I think there may be a new ball game ahead, a very good ball game, as a matter of fact, but a new one, and where Gorbachev may not be a big player anymore.
One more quick question to you, Senator Dole, and that is, just as Vladimir Posner was saying that Gorbachev has had a hard time getting along with Boris Yeltsin, so too President Bush has had a wonderful time getting along with Mikhail Gorbachev. Do you think he made the mistake of becoming too fixated on the personality?
Well, I don't believe so, but I think if in fact there is any second guessing, I think now if we just stick to our principles and maybe avoid the personalities, it'll be a better course for the administration to follow. Because I think Mr. Posner's right. I think it's going to be hard for Gorbachev to claim he was the victim when many of these people were appointed by Mr. Gorbachev. But it's going to be a very different relationship, I think, in many ways. But let's see what they do with their economy. Let's see what they do with aid to Cuba. And if they're willing to make sharp changes, we're willing to help.
Senator Dole, thank you very much. Vladimir Posner, thank you. When we come back, we'll take a look at how the Soviet Union people and their new taste for freedom and their new experience with freedom made a difference.
Did you know that when Alexander Graham Bell was about to invent the telephone, he stopped work because he ran out of money? Today at AT&T, we understand how important money is to a small business. So we developed AT&T Pro Watts, our discount calling plan that gives you AT&T quality at extremely competitive prices. At AT&T, almost half our business comes from small business. When you succeed, we succeed.
The first time I switched pain relievers, it was from aspirin to Tylenol. Then recently, I switched again, from Tylenol acetaminophen to Advil. You see, I got these really pounding headaches, and I found Tylenol didn't always get rid of all the pain. So I tried Advil and found that for my really tough headaches, 2 Advil worked better than 2 extra-strength Tylenol tablets, better than extra-strength Tylenol caplets, better than Tylenol gel caps. For my tough headaches, Advil just works better. Advil, advanced medicine for pain.
To get rid of her gray, my wife can spend 40 minutes. But I discovered this 5-minute hair coloring.
The revolutionary discovery called Just for Men from the leader in men's hair coloring. Simply apply Just for Men and in 5 minutes shampoo out.
Gray is blended away. The look of my natural color is back in 5 minutes. That was me, and it won't fade or wash out.
My hair takes forever, but you look great in just 5 minutes.
The look of your natural color in just 5 minutes with Just for Men.
This is the Mazda Summer Savings Express. Get a Mazda 626 sedan. Get Mazda Value Pack savings plus $1,000 cash back from Mazda, and you could save up to $1,820 now. Grab these savings while you can. They're moving.
The Mazda Summer Savings Express at your local Mazda dealer now.
What is this, Sprouse? Dr. Screw there? Pillows. Oh. Save 25% on all curtain panels. Shower curtain liners. Just $247. Oh. Browse.
It's a sadly familiar scene. Those resisting tyranny going into the streets and massive force being brought to bear against them, bloodshed, and then silence. Only this time, it was different. This time, the people won. ABC Nightline correspondent Jeff Greenfield takes a look at what it is about the new understanding of freedom that the Soviet people appear to have gained.
Tiananmen Square, Beijing, in the spring of 1989. Tens of thousands rally for democracy. Moscow, in the summer of 1991. Tens of thousands rally for democracy. 2 years ago, a single act of defiance symbolized the spirit of freedom. But ultimately, the tanks and the guns prevailed. Freedom lost. 2 days ago, a Soviet tank nearly rolled over a resistor. But in the end, the tanks and the guns retreated. Freedom won. What was the difference? Why did the Chinese authorities succeed in crushing the democracy movement while the Soviet coup collapsed after 60 hours? Insufficient cunning or brutality may be part of the explanation, but there is another key. In China 2 years ago, freedom was little more than a hope, a desire. In the Soviet Union, it had been something that people lived, breathed, tasted. In China, the dissenters had a symbol, the goddess of democracy, and they had a dream. But they had little else. No history, no free institutions to help them fight their fight. In the Soviet Union, it was different.
This is a product of perestroika. And I was born in this sense as president as a result of political process and democratic process.
Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev talking with Peter Jennings 3 weeks ago.
Society has the possibility to resolve any problem, even to have a different president if it wants.
A commonplace observation in America, but an unthinkable thought just a few years ago in the Soviet Union. Yet the fact is that the Soviet people had seen their leader arguing, persuading, debating, not just ordering. They had seen him being attacked in public, on national television. They had gone to the polls and chosen their representatives and some of their leaders in a secret ballot. And they had heard the president they did not elect promise to submit to that process.
He must be elected by the whole people, by popular election.
And slowly but surely, fear began to be put aside. When Gorbachev went to the Baltics to urge them not to secede, he argued his case in the streets with citizens who did not agree. Even with the military force that followed, that was a very different way for a Soviet leader to behave. And in 1990, on May Day, the most sacred day on the Soviet calendar, Gorbachev and his fellow leaders were booed and jeered. Other freedoms began to take root. 2 years ago, a Russian Orthodox church service like this one was held in the bowels of the Kremlin for the first time in more than 70 years. This in a country that long taught that religion was the opiate of the masses. Newspapers, radio, and television stations began to say what they wanted to say. not what the government told them to say. Trade unions began organizing, even striking, to demand better wages, better working conditions. In the past, a strike against a worker state was a contradiction. In other times, dissenters such as Andrei Sakharov were jailed or exiled, their every move and phone conversation tracked by the KGB. But by the end of his life, Sakharov was an honored citizen, fighting, almost with his last breath, for a freer nation. And workers had begun to experience the heady notion of working for themselves, not for the state. Indeed, it was even possible for a militant anti-communist to be elected the president of the most populous republic in the nation and to proclaim his intentions in no uncertain terms.
And I shall not turn aside from the path which I've embarked upon. I shall fight against the system which for 70 years has brought our country into such a miserable and denigrated situation.
In other times, the death of a leader or his removal from power meant nothing of consequence. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. But this time, the Soviet people knew what they were in danger of losing. They had leaders and institutions that had the will and the strength to resist the usurpers.
I think they underestimated the power of the people. They underestimated what a taste of democracy and freedom brings.
For decades, some Soviet experts have argued that there is something deep in the Russian soul that fears freedom, that longs for the strong hand of a strong leader. But maybe those experts were wrong. Maybe when people get a taste of freedom, it gives them an appetite for more, and the will to resist those who would wipe that freedom away. I'm Jeff Greenfield for Nightline in New York.
By sheer coincidence, the U.S. Librarian of Congress, Dr. James Billington, who is also a Soviet scholar, has been here in the Soviet Union throughout the events of the past week. Dr. Billington joins me here live in Moscow. Must have been an extraordinary experience for you. You've been studying this country for years, and you are here for what may have been the most dramatic events of a generation.
It really was an extraordinary event. It's one of those defining moments, I think, in history when you see people you've been studying all your life not only come to life, but in effect define, I think, a whole future course for their country. It's been an extraordinary couple of days.
And you have spent most of those days, I understand, with a rather wide spectrum of the Soviet public.
Yes, I was here to attend two conferences, a librarians conference and also a conference of returned Russian immigrants. They both opened on the day of the putsch, so I've been seeing a large number of Russians, and it's been extraordinary, in a sense, the ordinariness of life, the sense that this was sort of unreal, that it was surreal. This has been a kind of surreal stage for a couple of years now, and that the thing that was real was the conversations and the movement among the people focused on the White House and focused on the defense of it, and also on the articulation.
When you talk about the White House, you're talking about the Russian...
Their White House.
Their
yeah.
White House, the Russian Federation.
So at the same time, there was the feeling that what has been unreal for years was continuing in a sense with the coup, and that reality, the re-legitimization of authority that's been coming up from below throughout the provinces, there was a tremendous lack of support for this in all cities throughout the Soviet Union. And the word of that was coming in through these... I was on a talk show just the night before, a call-in talk show just the night before the coup in this little kind of small closet. There's this whole network of internal communication that has grown up, that has really transformed the nature of consciousness in this country, and that was dramatized by the success and by the enormous and wide spectrum of popular resistance to what was attempted.
One more quick question, Dr. Billington. Do you believe, as we have been suggesting throughout much of this program, that the seeds of democracy really have taken hold now?
I think they have, although it's important to remember that you're dealing with the heritage of the... I think this was the fever break. It determines whether the patient will live or die. And I think the patient has a chance to live. There's an enormous number of practical problems that remain to be solved. But I think not just the seeds of democracy, there's a movement forward to democracy and also backward to religion. The role of the rediscovery of their deeper spiritual roots is very important. Gleb Yakun, for instance, the world's greatest linguist. There was a whole new cast of characters took part in this, and we'll be hearing from them in the future, because many of the old politicians of all stripes who didn't stand up in the day or so when it wasn't clear what was going to happen. At the opening of this conference, somebody said, let us stand up and for the legal government of Russia. And those who stood up will be remembered. Those who did not stand up at that time and will be forgotten and cast aside.
Dr. Billington, thank you very much. When we come back, the view of an editorial cartoonist, Renan Lurie.
I want to show you why my Dirt Devil is the world's best-selling corded hand vacuum. Okay, Sam. Now, the toughest test for any vacuum is pit hair. So I gave my Dirt Devil a strong motor and a revolving brush just like an upright. And if it's powerful enough to clean up this mess, imagine what it can do with a dirty carpet. You could say Dirt Devil is man's best friend. Well, almost. So get a Dirt Devil and put the power of an upright in the palm of your hand.
Sometimes it takes the eye and the skill of an editorial cartoonist to capture the full flavor of events such as those that we have experienced over the past 24 hours. Here once again, the work of Renan Lurie.
Congratulations, Gorby. It's a democracy.
Just a reminder, we think that Mikhail Gorbachev will be addressing the Russian parliament in a matter of a few hours. And I will be reporting again from Moscow tomorrow for all of us here at ABC News in Moscow. That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel. Good night.
This has been Nightline. If you wish a videocassette version of Nightline, the cost is $14.98 plus $3.95.